Street Fighter X Tekken had all sorts of reasons why it failed, and we explore what happened about 10 years ago. Things including Capcom flooding the market with too many fighting games in 2012, and then making gyms a dirty, dirty, dirty word. We're hoping to help remind Capcom about past mistakes so they don't get repeated in Street Fighter 6. This is going to be a fairly controversial video, I think, for some people. Why it failed Street Fighter X Tekken, because this game, if you enjoyed it, like, by all means, hey, more power to you. We're talking about why it failed. It was not considered a success overall for Capcom. The game initially moved 1.4 million copies, even though Capcom expected it to sell 2 million. And we're going to get into all these kind of like reasons why this game just did not land with people. But if people can psycho crush the like button, it actually helps out the channel quite a bit, and we do appreciate it. But moving right along here, market saturation. Here's the number one thing here that Capcom actually blamed on this game. Like, after it had come out, they had blamed too many fighting games being released during this window, which they were one of the main perpetrators of, because Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 had actually just released a few months earlier than when Cross Tekken came out, and then Street Fighter 4 was still a popular game in 2012 and receiving updates back then as well. Also, Street Fighter Cross Tekken suffered from a lack of longevity, as at the end of 2013, Capcom dropped official support of the game, removing it from the Capcom Cup and only being supported by fan-run events. Like, that was it. They were like, yep, get it out of here, it's gone. All said, the game had a little less than 2 years of official tournament support from Capcom. And John, do you remember how many games players were juggling back in 2012 for like Evo and such?
I remember the feeling of when I was at Super Arcade at the time, and I remember Street Fighter Cross Tekken came out, and all of a sudden it was there. And I was like this mad rush to figure out what team you want to play and who you wanted to team up with, because they eventually made the standard for Evo was teams instead of singles, and that really changed the dynamic. Wow, that was actually the thing that turned me off, because I didn't want to, like, to the extent that I would want to practice and try to get good, I didn't want to have to, rely on somebody else, and like maybe they're slacking or whatever, or we don't jive together very well, whatever it is. That was, I think, something that really hurt the tournament scene, but that's its own little thing. But yes, I do remember there were a bunch of games. Now, I don't think it was overwhelming. I think that those that were playing at least in the Super Arcade space, and maybe they were a little more devoted than the average gamer, it was just another game, but there was room for it. It felt like there was room for it. But yes, there were a lot, but I don't think that that's going to turn things off, at least in the competitive scene, maybe in the casual.
So moving along here at number 2, we have the gameplay. And I know that a lot of people really swore by Cross Tekken, but one of the biggest problems this game had was timeovers, actually. Capcom put together a highlight package, showing the game, for Capcom Cup and other stuff like that. And like, I think over half or so were time over wins, which is, sometimes those are hype, but when those are what you are used to, those are the norm. That is a big issue, because the most impactful moments of a match would actually happen at the very start of Street Fighter Cross Tekken. And then players would run away or turtle up for like the last 20 or 30 seconds. And then not helping that either was that the Pandora mechanic, the comeback mechanic, was basically a forfeit button. And it was like, okay, well, you can do that, and maybe if you do perfect execution and perfect scenario, you can get it and you can actually make that work. But it was so rare to actually have that happen that we would post about it on the front page when it happened. That's like, if we posted about every single time someone landed an Ultra in Street Fighter 4, there would be thousands of posts, if not way more than that. It was so rare to actually have Pandora, which looked awesome and should have been a great mechanic, actually work out, that we would post about it almost every time it happened. And that, like, I think we've got a total of like 5 posts up there on our website about it. It's
It wasn't a fun game to watch. That was a big thing. It was annoying. And I can tell you, at the end of the night, if you made it into like the top 3 at Super Arcade again of your game, then you had to wait for the other top 3s to play out. Mine was Street Fighter 4, and so that would be the last game that would play. And you'd have to wait for the other top 3s to play, and then we hit like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and watching people time over in that. Plus, if people were playing Tekken Tag Tournament 2, which took a long time as well, that got annoying, particularly annoying. But yes, so here's the thing about Cross Tekken. It always kind of had good fundamentals in that it was very attractive to, I'd say, the third strike crowd and how it played competitively. People found a lot of enjoyment in trying to land those hits and in the interactions. But because of things like once that happened, then it turned into turtle mode, and so it's not very watchable. Some of the mechanics, like Pandora mode, was essentially moot. That was a lot to write against it. And so yes, you had some people that a lot of people that appreciated the core like flow of the game, but there were too many issues that like you didn't have a majority liking it, and I think that's why you saw it play out the way it did.
Yeah, it very footsie based, and so that's why the pros enjoyed it. But it's so many other issues, and then we get to gyms, and gyms were such a time suck that tournaments basically instantly banned them. John, how many tournaments run on time in the fighting game community?
None.
Yes,
All of them don't.
Yeah, and so Capcom said, hey, let's make that exponentially harder to do than it already is by adding gems into the mix. And so everyone took this main feature of the game and just said, no, like at the highest levels, we're not even going to bother with it. Even Capcom on their official tournaments didn't even bother with it because it was like, I think they tried a few times and it was just such a big difficulty to do it.
It was intimidating too. As a competitive player, I didn't okay, if you really want to hammer down and figure out like the perfect setup, which you need to do if you're going to be competitive, all of a sudden you have all of these gems and ones that you could DLC get or pre-order for and whatnot, and you'd have to figure out the right combo for your, not only your team, but your play style and your partner's play style. And it's like, to me, I was like, I don't want to mess around with gems at all. Can we please play without gems? I don't want to like have to learn, and then you have to learn what everybody else's gems do for their character, and like, nah, get out of here.
Yeah, that's a sentiment a lot of people had. It was not enduring to the fan base, and a number of people actually felt that some of the gyms were of the pay-to-win variety, even though the actual results of this were a bit dicey because most tournaments, again, didn't allow gyms to be used. But Ono actually had a quote about this. So Ono going from Japanese to English, so there could be something lost in translation here. But he said, with regards to gyms, to reflect on it now, this was a handful of years after Street Fighter Cross Tekken went away. He said, we feel like we should have implemented them in a different way, let players play with the gyms differently. At that time, we thought of it as a means to aid beginning players in leveling up, the playing field and leveling, keeping things even between advanced players and beginning players, and that usually does not go so well. But he actually says, in the end, it might have turned out to be a little bit too close to a pay-to-win mechanic for our comfort level. And it was like, wow, like Ono flat out saying, like, he's not saying it was play to win, but he said it felt too much like that for the community. And just gyms were so bad, like Capcom went through great pains to distance themselves when they were making Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite to not say gyms or anything like that in there. They're like, oh, these are stones. These are not gems. And it was like, I think literally to this day, if Capcom ever introduces anything in a fighting game that has the word gym in it, they're going to really try hard to rename it and redo it if at all humanly possible. Gyms are now forever a pejorative in our community.
Yeah, and I mean, it's sad. I feel bad. I'm like, I remember talking to some of the developers at the time that worked directly on that. That game had so much to it. There's a lot of potential, but there was just one too many missteps that, and I think that's kind of the theme of what you're getting at here, is that the community began to see it as a thing, a negative thing. And once that happened, it's like, first impressions are so important. You can't bring them out of that very easily. And to your first point, they had a lot of other options at the time. There was a lot of games around. So, hey, if I'm intimidated by gems, if I'm feeling like timeouts are annoying, if I don't want to have to figure out how to play with another partner, if you're asking too much right off the bat of me to play this game and to commit to this game, I'll go play something else.
Yep. That's what a lot of people did. And moving on here, we've got even more stuff that went wrong. At number 3, launch issues. Street Fighter Cross Tekken actually shipped with a major audio issue due to the game's rollback code, which was the first AAA fighting game, as far as I know, that had rollback code in it, which, shout outs to this game, but it would actually bug out the audio, either causing it to loop or to stop entirely. That had to be patched out right away. So like there was it wasn't a day one patch. I think it came out like a week later or whatever, but that's as soon as Capcom could get it back, through Microsoft and Sony and all that. But not even that, but also as people dug into the game further, they realized that it contained on-disc DLC.
There it is.
Yeah, the hackers that cracked the game, they made the DLC characters playable even before they were released, and they showed them in a nearly finished state. Like, oh yeah, like they're basically done. They're basically, go ahead and rock and roll with this. And like they were playing them, I think, in ranked matches and everything, and it just became a mess.
Can you imagine?
Mess.
Can you imagine the devs that were the most responsible when that information came out and when they saw people playing early. Because I mean, it wasn't too long ago, 10, 15, oh my gosh, years ago ish, or whatever it was. But like, that's a long time in technical development, and now we see leaks and stuff like that all the time. It wasn't as prominent there. Can you imagine what your heart, like, how far their heart fell down into their stomach?
Oh, yeah.
When they found it. It's like, oh man.
Yeah. They were warned about this because with Street Fighter 4, Capcom had said that it was impossible to just not have DLC on the disc, basically not roll it out in the update, because like everyone's got to have copies of the DLC and blah blah blah, and that was crap, because even back then in 2012 there were other games that rolled out DLC incrementally, like we have with Street Fighter 5 now and other fighting games. They because basically everything is data mined at this point in time, right? Like everything is going to get data mined, so you just can't have those files on there. Well, back then Capcom's like, no, we have to do it this way. It has to be done this way, because they didn't know how to do it another way. And so we got the impossible to do it the other way. And it's like, okay, well, if that's impossible, here's what the community is going to do to you. And all of a sudden, it was possible to do it the other way. All of a sudden, everything changed once Capcom got hacked. They're like, oh yeah, that actually is. We can do that. It was just, oh man, just pissing people off left and right with this sucker. It was crazy.
It was a time, we saw this through Street Fighter V as well, a bunch of lessons learned when it comes to the relationship with fans, through communication, and what is acceptable and what is regarded as disrespectful or not acknowledging or prioritizing too obviously. Capcom's a business, we all get that. But when you too obviously prioritize your bottom line over the fun of the fans, that's a express route to them going and doing something else.
Yep.
Like
yeah.
playing your other game, Street Fighter 4.
Yeah. Why am I going to give you more of my money for a bad experience?
I'm out of here, Capcom. Yeah. Where's my Marvel vs. Capcom
3? Give them a lot of options, so that in some ways it worked out, in some ways not so much. But number 4 actually is leaving a bad taste in people's mouths. My goodness, was this I got a couple sips of Street Fighter X Tekken, and man, is it bitter and just not a good experience. Bad box art Mega Man was a clever idea in the right context. It actually was a cool homage back to, the American US cover and stuff like that. But it ended up being terrible because they ended up canceling Mega Man Universe once Keiji Inafune left the company, and then there was nothing to take its place. And the Mega Man fans, which there are plenty of them in the fighting game community, they kind of felt like Capcom was trolling them, because it's like, well, we don't even have a replacement, and our replacement, our fighting game adaptation is a red-eyed, really chunky version of Mega Man, and this is what we get, and we get it in Street Fighter X Tekken. And it was just, it was a painful thing for a lot of people. And it's one more of those like really negative marks that people don't, remember from back then, because, we've gotten so many great Mega Man games since, right? Mega Man 11 is an awesome game. Like, I love that game. And they've done really good stuff with the franchise, but like back then, it was a bitter pill to swallow.
It's like when you tell an obviously offensive joke, but there's enough truth or whatever it is in it that people find it funny and they can't get mad. Sometimes, like, it's not funny and they do get mad, or it just happens at the wrong time and it's just the context does not allow for the joke. And I think that's what you're saying happened here, right? It's like, yeah. Well, you said as much. Like, it would have been okay. It was a good idea, but the way things played out, it's just like, oh, her mom actually just, passed away. So the fact that she made a joke about it wasn't really, read the room.
Get my mom's name out of your damn mouth, John. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so it actually shelved Street Fighter, or Tekken Cross Street Fighter. That was the Bandai Namco version, even though that game was about 30% done, which is not an insignificant amount of resources to dump into it. Street Fighter Cross Tekken was just so not well received. It's like, well, Bandai Namco wasn't even going to follow through with it. It's like they had that option. Capcom was just pissing off their fans with the disc locked content. Oh my goodness. Flooding the market with fighters and just creating an almost near impossible situation for Street Fighter Cross Tekken to succeed. And I'm actually shocked the game lived on for as long as it did, as even to this very day, people still play it and love the game. They had a vibrant mod community behind this game. Like they were modding in all sorts of crazy, like awesome stuff. And it was like, wow, like the game was really open-ended and really good for a number of things. And it actually, to this very day, it sold just a little shy of 2 million copies, which is actually not so bad, because Super Street Fighter 2 on the Super NES sold about that much, and then Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection, released in 2018, performed around that level as well. This game did not match expectations in terms of how much budget Capcom had for it, what they expected for it, all that other kind of stuff, but the community that backs this game is really impressive to this very date, and like how passionate they are about it, and like how much like the stuff that did connect that they love. And I have to mention that, because there's nothing wrong with the community support. The community support of this game has been phenomenal. If most other games had this level of community support, it'd be like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy good. It was just Capcom messing up left and right. But and again, I'm not just trying to crap on Capcom here. We're looking ahead to the launch of Street Fighter 6, and I want to highlight these mistakes so we don't repeat them again. I know a number of these are not going to get repeated, just for simple logistics, but darn it, like I don't want to see this happen again. So it's like, we're going to talk about this stuff now, so there's no excuse. You can't point to it and say like, oh, that was 10 years ago, we forgot, kind of thing. Like, no, we're EventHubs, we remember this stuff. So you're gonna have to bleep that out, sorry John, but anyway. Cut
to the summer update, and Nakayama like, all right guys, hear me out, Street Fighter 6 gems. We're all just like, nope. Cross Tekken did have what I've come to call the TLTL update, which is the too little too late update, where they did fix things like the audio glitch and that I think was done earlier, but the timeouts and like some of the things that were wrong with the gameplay and such, which really did dial it in and allow for that competitive side of things to really flourish, like it kind of was intended to. But again, too many bad window dressings for everybody else, and so yes, you got the competitive crowd, sure, but it's not enough to be commercially successful.